From I Am Interchange, it's the Hatch Podcast series. Water doesn't begin at the tap. It begins in the dark, underground, in aquifers older than memory, as snow in mountain air, as vapor, as storm, something that refuses to stay still. By the time it reaches us, it has already lived many lives. There's a saying in the West, whiskey is for drinking, water's for fighting. A line that carries a history inside it. Compacts, canals, courtrooms. Water hasn't always been political. For most of human history, it simply existed. But today, especially across the western United States, it often is. I'm Tate Chamberlain. This episode begins in the Arizona desert, at Arcosanti. In 1970, architect Paolo Soleri and the Cosanti Foundation began building this place in central Arizona. The idea was arcology, architecture shaped by ecology, a community trying to imagine living with the land instead of against it. Curved concrete rises from the desert. Light pours through the open space. A place built on questions. It was also the site of the Hatch Summit. Artists, scientists, entrepreneurs, policymakers, storytellers. People trying to collaborate their way through something more resilient, which makes it the right place to talk about water. Because water means different things at once. For some, it's sacred. For others, it's infrastructure, reservoirs, pipelines, allocations, and rights. In the western United States, those rights often follow a simple rule. First come, first served. Use it or lose it. That logic shaped rivers like the Colorado, now feeding cities, farms, and reservoirs like Lake Powell. But reservoirs drop, snowpack shrinks, and management starts to sound more like triage. And the story doesn't stop in Arizona. In the Andes, salt flats hold the lithium powering electric vehicles. In Bogota, officials count the days in their reservoirs as the possibility of day zero enters the conversation. Different places, same question. What does it mean to live with water? In this conversation, I sit down with Michelle C. Benally, David Perkey, and Joel Barnes to explore that question. What a water right really is, who decides, and what it might mean to remember that water was never just a resource in the first place. Because water keeps moving, and the question is how we move with it. Welcome, you all. Do you believe that water is a human right? David?
I mean, it is an interesting sort of proposition that there's like a minimum amount of water that every human being needs to survive, and that should be guaranteed to them. And I think it sounds appealing, but achieving that is difficult because the water, that amount of water might not be where those people are. And so there's always some sort of intervention to connect the waters that are available to the people that need them, even this minimum amount or an acceptable amount. And that costs something, you know, mm-hmm. It costs something. Water's a very heavy thing. Moving it takes a lot of effort. So how do you cover those costs? I mean, if those costs aren't covered by the users, then they'd have to be covered by some other sort of larger governance system. And maybe that's the way to go, that there is a global investment to provide people with this basic human right to water. But the issue comes in operationalizing and financing that dream.
Joel?
There are so many sub-questions behind the question, is water a human right? That for me, I think about, so you can't live without water. You need water. You can't live without air. What if you couldn't take your next breath? Water isn't a whole lot different than that. It just takes a little longer. And believe me, if is clean air a human right? I think people would probably say, yeah, but there's so many sub-questions. Like you were saying, David, how do you operationalize addressing the human right, the basic right to clean and a minimal amount of water? It costs a lot of money sometimes, and it takes a lot of coordination And sometimes someone who wants to make money off of providing that human right, they move in because that's what they do. They want to make a profit, and they make a profit off of that and take advantage of the fact that, oh, this particular community needs clean water, so we'll provide it to them for a cost. So, answering that question is easy, a lot easier than operationalizing it.
Did you say it was a human right?
Yes.
Okay, you're saying yes.
Yes.
What you didn't answer?
I mean,
yes or no?
I guess I don't have an answer because we don't have a solution, right? We wouldn't know how to do it yet, and that's the question that would have to be answered first.
But just because you don't know how to do it doesn't mean you can still.
Yeah, I mean, sure, I'm in favor of the concept, but I'm daunted by the operational realities of trying to realize that.
Okay, in favor of the concept, but still stunted. Michelle C?
Wow, like the fact that we're here having to talk about, is water, or ask that question, is water a human right? Like, have we really gotten to that part in this world? I guess, like, again, it's trying to objectify what shouldn't be objectified. Is water a human right? It's again seeing it as a resource, or it's not trying to live with it. And again, we're talking too about the operational approach of being able to provide and to have access to communities who don't have access. Oh my gosh, like that for me right now, I know, oh gosh, I think that's just that's sad for me. It's disheartening to me, but also I understand the realities of, where we are at in this world, and talking about that as well, that is actually right now put on the table. I think I'm still trying to sit with the fact that we're having the conversation about that. So I'm sorry if I don't have an answer. I'm just trying to sit and be with that for a little bit right now.
You're just a little dumbfounded that we even have to ask the question.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm imagining the culture that you came from, just growing up around the water that was there and living with it, as you say, right? And it was enough, and it was, and the systems got so convoluted that idea of just living with the water that's there, and that you can benefit from, or that you can be with, is very, very different from, how do we guarantee access to people?
This, for me, this is just such a great example of how important it is to recalibrate our relationship with water to include the indigenous people, whatever region you're dealing with. It's not just the Southwest, but in any bioregion, to really recalibrate in the company of indigenous cultures really helps you to kind of check yourself and make it, and not just root yourself in what you know about water, but your relationship with water, and have that inform your systems. Not just what you know about water, but how you feel about water and your relationship with water.
David, you're living in Bogota, and you brought up some wild statistics about Bogota's water experience right now. Can you take us through that a little bit?
Yeah, right now I'm living and working in Bogota, Colombia, and working on water management issues, primarily in the Andean region of South America. And the Andes, like many mountains, are climate influencers, right? And they as the air masses go up into the mountains and they get colder as they rise up, they can't hold as much moisture, and it rains a lot. So there's this notion of the interaction between mountains and climate. And so Bogota is very far up in the mountains. And so it has relatively small watershed above it. There's a statistic that it's if you do an indicator of how much watershed you have upstream and the number of people in your city, it's the most vulnerable in the world.
That's cool.
And so it's dependent on...
What's cool, the statistic or the experience?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, the system is very, very, very dependent on rainfall, right? And they do have some infrastructure to bring water from neighboring watersheds, but also very high up in those watersheds. So the capture area for the city is relatively small. There's a benefit from the fact that there's an ecosystem in these high Andean regions that's called a páramo. And it's be the equivalent of a high altitude peat moorland that is formed above like 3,800 meters, so maybe 10,000 feet. So you just have this carpet of peat moorlands that drape over the highest parts of the mountain. And they have a very high water holding capacity, and they serve as sort of a natural reservoir for holding the rainfall and letting it just flow out slowly. It's a very cool natural system that Bogota has benefited from. And so they don't have a lot of storage in the system. I mean, it just rained enough, and there was these peat moorlands that were regulating the runoff very effectively. And with the current sort of climatic patterns that we're in, it hasn't been raining. So Bogota went very quickly from, a system that was working to like starting counting down the days that we're going to not have enough storage to meet the demand in a city of 10 million people. And watching that sort of reaction has been really interesting. And right now they divided the city into 10 zones, and every 10th day you have no water, your water's shut off. And we're in the third cycle of that now. And there's hope that that's going to reduce demand enough and that the rains will come and the system will get back on track. But it's emblematic of many places in the world, this sort of 0-day concept, which first I think came into consciousness in Cape Town, South Africa. A few years ago, they were talking about day zero. There's been a day zero conversation that happened in Sao Paulo, Brazil. There's one happening in Mexico City right now, many Mexican cities. And I think it's just that kind of tipping point moment, like, whoa, these systems we thought were so reliable and functioned so well that we didn't have to think about them. And that not thinking about it allowed us to ignore all the injustices that we've been talking about as well. Maybe they're not so reliable. So,
that is such a great example, and really interesting, by the way, how delicate those moorlands, high alpine moorlands, they really acted that like a reservoir. Yeah, like our Lake Mead and Lake Powell.
Yeah, I mean those natural systems were serving the same function as constructed reservoirs in the Southwest.
Sure.
Providing the storage that would allow the demand to be met over time when there wasn't raining as much. And now that's because of the lack of rain for the last half year. It's really starting to go over the tipping point.
Yes, the Southwest moorlands, our Lake Mead and Lake Powell, they're a little dry as well.
Right. Yeah.
That's a great example for me of from when I hear you describe that, of how I keep coming back to the fact that there are some universal principles of that sustainability in practice and theory rest upon. The SDGs are a great example of that. There are universals in which sustainability, rests upon. Yet, when it comes right down to it, sustainability is place-based. I mean, every bioregion has a different formula for sustainability. And your example it's great.
Yeah, and I think that I'll just go a little bit deeper into this situation because I'd be curious to see if there's the same kind of like governance and interest-based reactions that are, come about in these water crises. So the páramo ecosystem, it's called the Páramo Chingasa, and it's above Bogota. Bogota sits at around 8,600 feet elevation. So you're going up to maybe 10,000, 11,000 feet. And you have this páramo ecosystem, and it's a national park because it's a wonderful ecosystem. I mean, it's full of Andean bears and jaguares and, birds and plants that are just endemic to that ecosystem. So it's part of a national park. And there was a big battle because the Bogota water system wanted to build a dam at sort of the outflow of the Paramo ecosystem, but in the national park. And they did. And that's from that dam that there's an interbasin transfer that brings the water to Bogota. And now the conversation is we need another dam. And the National Park Service is saying, well, you're not going to do it in our jurisdiction. We're protecting an ecosystem, right? But we need the water. We can't be having a city of 10 million people where they shut off the water every 10 days. So they just get into this sort of loop of sort of unresolvable discourses. And I wonder if that's the way it's happening in the Southwest too, that there's not even yet a common discourse as to how to be addressing these issues.
Yeah. It's similar. Actually, there's, of course, the 7 states that the Colorado River runs through, and you've got from the 7 states, you have your upper basin and you have your lower basin states. Right now, both upper and lower have been charged by the federal government to come to an agreement, again, of how they are going to allocate water to each of these 7 states. And upper basin is pushing back on lower basin, and the lower basin is pushing back on the upper basin. So the upper basin includes Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, and the lower basin states is Arizona, California, and Nevada. And so the upper basin states are saying, like lower basin, you all have to continue cutting. Lower basin is saying the same thing, like upper basin, you all need to cut your allocations. So there is that battle going back and forth. So the states, and I'm not quite sure, at least right now, where they're at, but I knew that the lower basin states have come to an agreement of, again, they are going to cut percentages. Arizona, again, is going to be cutting more percentages of how much they're going to be using in regards to Colorado River water. So, it's same argument going back and
there's
forth.
Not even a common narrative that people are sharing. It's just all interest-based discourse, right? So,
right.
And I think that's one of the biggest challenges of, thinking about, and I'm really careful to call it a resource and to talk about something that needs to be managed, given what you said earlier about just being with it and sort of experiencing it and living with it. But, it's very common in these water management situations, which are very local. The issues in the Paramo are not the same in the Colorado River Basin, but that there's this people come to it from an interest-based perspective, and it's about defending their interests. And there's very little discussion about, okay, is there a way we could do this differently that would actually be, win-win? And you can't get to that analysis and conversation because the interest groups are so dug in, and it just seems to be an unfortunate dynamic that happens in a lot of these systems.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, parties are forced to cooperate, because if you don't, then everybody loses. And the Department of Interior is kind of, they have, a veiled threat that if the states don't figure it out on the state level, then we're going to come in and tell you how it's going to go. And the states, wouldn't be an understatement to say they're petrified that the Department of Interior is going to, impose a set of rules that they then have to follow. But so that's really the threat. And so the states are working hard to figure it out. And in fact, the lower basin, I think just this week, agreed to do a further cut on top of the 3 other cuts they've already made.
Yep.
So it's the lower basin that's where all the people are.
Yep.
But unfortunately, it's, for the lower basin, it's the upper basin that actually, has their full complement of Rocky Mountain and Wind River Range snowmelt.
And a lot of that, too, a lot of these discussions are being had without the indigenous peoples.
Without the indigenous, I was going to ask that.
The Colorado River. I mean, this compact happened a long time ago, and the indigenous peoples weren't in these conversations, and yet again, they aren't. Joel, you bring up the whole people being forced to be a part of this discussion or this argument. now it's, like at least in the state of Arizona is having settlements now, meeting in settlements with a lot of indigenous peoples, with Navajo Nation. I can speak for Navajo Nation. Having to settle water rights with indigenous peoples. A part of what the compact was that, and this was a number that was just arbitrarily given to indigenous peoples along the Colorado River, was like, you'll get 20% of Colorado River water. But with the lack of infrastructure, with the lack of funding, indigenous peoples are not getting still yet that full 20% of that allocation. And now with these retalks or reconversations about this compact again, now indigenous peoples are saying, or they're being forced to have to go through this without actually fully understanding, in Western systems, what it is that quantifying their usage.
What is a water right in your concept, right? It's
right.
That gets back to this rights for water, right?
Yeah. So. So indigenous peoples are, at least Navajo people, I've been in a couple of some of these meetings where some of the community members are talking about, like, we don't have swimming pools, we don't mow our lawns, or we don't use water in that way. We use, like, it's for our means. And so for us to be able to quantify that, like, we can't, because it's something that, like, if we are using, we use it minimally. They use it just as to continue to live off. So for them to try to quantify that, but there are being pushed from the state of Arizona to say, okay, quantify your usage so that then we can give you some allocations of what tribes or what the Navajo Nation is going to be given,
without even talking about the infrastructure that would be required to bring that water to them.
And that's the real catcher, is that even when eventually the Navajos in this case will get their water right adjudicated, then they have to figure out how to get the water to these rural homes that are in the middle of the reservation, and delivering that water, even when you have the adjudicated
this gets back
right.
to my point earlier that, that's the difficulty of operationalizing and financing this, I mean, that living with this unfortunate sort of concept of rights, which is what sort of set you off in the first, it set off your reaction to the prior question.
Yeah.
There's still this question of, okay, we've got a right, but how do we get the water, right? And if we don't get it, somebody else is going to take it. It's,
And so that question again, too, of is water a human right? Like, having to be forced to answer that question, when going back to that, it is a human, it is a human right. But like, I feel like now it's like a forced question, or even in regards to indigenous communities, it's like, again, being forced into these discussions when the lack of understanding or even the lack of infrastructure is not there. Mm-hmm. So
I'll put another system on the table that, with some trepidation, since none of us are working in it, so we can talk about it as uneducated outside observers. But the Klamath system in southern Oregon and northern California seems to be another one where, this conflict is resolving itself around legal battles and legislation. But my understanding in that system is that the indigenous people have really, been able to assert a powerful role in that conversation, where they're not sort of just an afterthought. Mm-hmm. And that came out of, I guess, their treaty conditions with the federal government, but that they are in a position to aggressively and assertively claim the rights that they have in the upper part of the basin. And that's forcing a rethinking about how the water system is being managed. Mm-hmm. I don't know if anyone here knows enough about the Klamath system and the indigenous people's rights in that system, but that seems to be a one where the power dynamics have shifted a little bit, right?
I mean, some of that has to do with the state government, because, each state really has governs the water within their political boundaries. And I think from what I understand and read, the Oregon state legislature is a little bit more amenable to the native indigenous water rights and rights in general than Arizona. Arizona has been quite politely combative and evasive with indigenous water rights. And they have done everything they possibly can to delay. It's basically delay.
I mean, this is, I think, an example of how power dynamics in these conversations are so key. And I don't know enough of the details to know, but what I've heard is that in the Klamath system, the indigenous people are becoming more and more powerful in the discussion, and therefore are more successful in sort of asserting their claims that they need the water for the fish that are part of their culture, and they need it's so interesting about how power dynamics are so determinant in these systems. So, do you know anything about that community there?
No, I do not. I don't.
They say in the West, as you both know, as we all know, water flows uphill towards money and power. And unfortunately, there are times in which indigenous cultures have very little of both, at least in terms of in the Euro-American, systems, right? The power they have really has to do with their presence in place. I like the visual of water politics. I mean, they are so complex and moving, all these moving targets. You really can't even see the edges. Water politics can be completely overwhelming. But when you put that in the context of an indigenous presence, that huge blob of water politics and issues that you can't even see the edges becomes this really thin veneer over a very deep indigenous presence. And, we got to tap into that.
I'm curious, with all this urgency and the need for creating water management that is sustainable for everyone, how far should activism go to get there?
There's certainly an appropriate role and niche for peaceful protest, but that's just one prong of many. Right. But sometimes crisis requires attention. You need to draw attention to the issue and to the social and ecological unjust. So peaceful protest is an important piece of that. Yeah. But you also need to strategize and work within the systems to affect change. In terms of water in the West, you need a good lawyer. You need a team of good lawyers. And that's part of what I think indigenous cultures they've gotten to the point now where they actually have really solid legal advice. And they're being able to talk the talk of the Euro-American water rights system. And so they show up at the table with the right expertise. Yeah. And I think too, you say prong, and I think that's multiple prongs, right? And I know that it's not just one thing that you need to approach water as far as activism. It's all areas of knowledge, of approaches that I believe that to this emergency that water needs that attention.
There does seem to be, thinking beyond water, there does seem to be a sort of a growing sort of focus on activism and protest, and probably underneath the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, there is a water factor. Oh yeah, but that movement of sort of pent up sort of passion that we're all experiencing now is really calling for a fundamental system change. It's not let's not just play around the margins, because the system itself is not going to enable a just outcome as just as being defined. And there does seem to be a number of domains where that conversation is happening. The system is not working. The system has to change. We're not advocating for sort of small adjustments within this current system. We're advocating for a complete change in the system that we're operating within. And, if we bring that back to water, is that where we are? You've talked about, lawyering up within the current system and fighting within that current system and advocating for better power balance within the current system.
Mm-hmm.
But is advocacy really about sort of the margins of possibility within the current system, or is advocacy really about like this system's not working, we got to change it?
Well, I think it's both. It's both. And in some ways, you talk about fundamental systems change. There is talk, and there has been, but now the talk is getting a little bit more amplified, of revisiting prior appropriation in the West.
Mm-hmm.
Is it working? I mean, obviously it's not working, but we're doing the best we can with a very ancient, old school system. And first come, first serve, use as much as you can, because if you don't use it, you lose it.
Mm-hmm.
Those are not, that is the antithesis of sustainability. And so it's kind of ironic that we've held on to this prior appropriation doctrine so long when it is at complete odds with sustainability. So at some point, the systems are either going to crumble, or maybe hopefully just before that, or as they're crumbling, we're going to rethink that. And we're rethinking whether we want to not throw prior appropriation out, but change it to where it can align with sustainability, which is, it's not going to look a whole lot like it originally was written.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a lot, at least with the Department of Water Resources, similarly, there's been a lot of talks of, the compact having to be changed. So like just dovetailing off of you, Joel, like having to rewrite the whole compact to now what water in the West does look like currently, and having to reconsider some of what went into that compact. But that it's a huge, like, mind-boggling. Water in the West is not easy. And so it's like just this huge mind-boggling layer of policy and legislation that just is so complex that it's and the way in which, at least in the state of Arizona, how water is being used, it's the complexities of it is, man, it's tough. And I can't speak for other states, but like, I know that having to change up a lot of how water is being used, and as well as the doctrine and the compact, there is going to be, that paradigm shift of how water is being used. There's got to be a huge shift in that.
I mean, leaving aside whether we're talking about we need a completely new system or there's solutions in the margins of the current system, your question about the role of advocacy, I think, has got a higher level sort of way of thinking about it. Mm-hmm. And I really do think that any social evolution, whether it's in water management or anything else, any social evolution, all the actors need to be present on stage to make this happen, because there's a lot of inertia in these systems. Mm-hmm. And they're not going to change on their own, right? And the government agencies that have been set up to govern these systems, they're not the most innovative, people in the world. They're trying to manage a current system. And the Department of Water Resources isn't going to suddenly announce that there's some new innovative solution that's going to, save or, improve water management in Arizona. So you need the advocates. You need the academics who are producing new knowledge. You need the indigenous people who can be sharing old knowledge, and you need the consulting firms who can work with the various water users to sort of explore what this all means. And so there's a constellation of actors that are required to realize any social evolution, in my opinion. And advocates are one of it, because they bring this issue to the attention of the public, right? Mm-hmm. Who's got many, many issues that they could care about. So leaving aside whether we're going to redo the system or find solutions on the margins of the current system, I think advocates have a role to play in that dance of social evolution, along with all the other important actors.
What are some questions that aren't being asked?
Well, I think that there are some components of a sustainably watered American West that already exist, that are easy to do, but they're just not convenient. And I think that we need to really identify those and have incentives for communities to then embrace those elements of a sustainable lifestyle. But they won't do it if it's too inconvenient or it costs money. So we need policy that then encourages and rewards sustainable lifestyles I think that's overdue. And some of that's happening. Like I know in Prescott and in Phoenix, the city governments will sometimes pay people to pull up lawns. For every square foot, you get a rebate of a certain number of dollars on your next water bill. If you install low-flow toilets and shower fixtures, you get a rebate on your next water bill. So we're taking baby steps in that direction. But when you were talking, David, about for every 10 days, you don't have any water, to me, that's not that big a deal. We should be able to handle that.
It hasn't been that difficult. You fill up a couple of jugs of water the night before and
exactly.
Don't take a shower. And,
exactly. And so that's the kind of thing where the American dream we need to recheck and we need to recalibrate what the American dream is.
I mean, I think that's the question that's not getting answered.
Right.
Is how does the way we live as, what's the word, consumers, citizens, people, sentient beings.
Americans,
Chileans. It's a universal question. How is the way we live connected to energy systems, food systems, water systems, and because these are all very complex interactions. I mean, we haven't talked about the hydroelectric generating capacity in the Colorado River, but that turns on a lot of lights as well, too, right? So where is those... The questions are not being answered is about how our expectations about how we live interact with water systems, energy systems, food systems, transport systems, and those are hard, complex, integrated questions to get to. So.
A question that's really not being asked is, how do we live in place?
right?
Living in one place should look different from living in another place.
Right.
And we shouldn't be living the same way everywhere. So if you choose to move to the Southwest, you got to live like you live in a desert.
Yes.
And it shouldn't be like you live in Ohio. It should look significantly different. And I think that's really obvious to many people, but I think that that's the question not being answered. Like, if you're going to move to the Southwest, you got to live like you live in a desert.
Yeah. Yeah. And even, and further on that too, like, what is your relationship to the natural world? Or what is your relationship to the environment around you? Like, in those questions as well.
It'd be interesting to know if that indigenous community in Ohio sort of put water in such a sacred place, or whether there was some other thing that was more central to their cosmology, and that reveals the importance of water in this landscape. And your people evolved recognizing that, and maybe it's about trees or some other resource for where that was sort of the limiting constraint in the system, and a belief system and a lifestyle built up around another sort of key element. But that's the issue of place, right? It's different everywhere. So, but
I think the commercial industry, all the economic growth in Arizona, really that works just like any other capitalistic profit-making state in all over the world and in the United States. So to say, well, no, actually, if you're going to move to the Southwest, your profit making has to reflect the scarcity of water. You have to take that into consideration. I just don't think that's going to fly. I think we're going to have some crumbling of systems before that actually happens. And I still come back to this book I read several years ago called The Water Knife. And it really does portray the Southwest in like 200 years. And, it's not pretty. But I think that is what is going to have to happen, maybe.
But go back to what your father told you about water and crying for water. I thought that was really amazing, because when that crumbling happens, the water cycle will be the same. And,
in my adult life, getting more into water, at least working with water, however way that may have been recreationally or now as an advocate or managing it, always having this sort of sad feeling about water and how there's been a loss of relationship with it. And I was having this conversation with my parents, and my dad especially was like, you're not supposed to cry for water, because I was tearing up. And he shared further that water will do what it's going to do. It's going to continue to go through its life cycle or its cycle. And he was like, it's the people that you need to be mindful of, because there's always somebody out there who's going to be in it for themselves. So being aware of that is more so where you should be placing yourself in. And it's interesting, again, how you did, and I think you're bringing it up for a reason, Joel, you shared that this book wasn't really covering what water is going to look like. It was more covering what the people, the impacts to the people in the future. So, yeah, like there's that human element in not just water, but in all other aspects of the world, land, water, social. Like there's that human aspect that just sort of messes with those particular respective cycles that we all should be mindful of.
As a future ancestor, what is the message that you would leave for future generations regarding water?
I can speak again from growing up from my parents. When I was leaving the Four Sacred Mountains, living on Navajo Nation, going outside of those boundaries, you're always thought to protect ourselves when we go outside of those Four Sacred Mountains. And that's in the Four Corners region. Those are where those mountains are located. Anyways, I was leaving, and my dad handed me a Navajo dictionary, and he was like, don't lose your language. He's like, well, you're out there. Remember who you are. And so, yeah, that's something that I would have to say to ancestors is, remember who you are and where you come from. Don't lose your language. Don't lose your morals or your values. Continue your relationship with Mother Earth, with Father Sky, because that's what is going to continue to keep you grounded, or to continue to be as Dene, or be as Navajo, or as a people.
I'm not sure exactly what message I would convey, but it would have something to do with living in the company of water that really embraces respect and recognition of scarcity, and that you really need to live in the Southwest in a way that cherishes water and doesn't use it recklessly, but holds it in high regard as like it's a living being, not just a thing. And that you might not have to do that elsewhere, but if you come to the Southwest, that's kind of your ticket in.
Yeah, I think going back to how this conversation started is, being a young person finding peace and solace by the riverside. I think that's not a unique feeling. I think it's a deep human feeling. We find tranquility and peace in being near water, and that remind us. I'd like to remind those to remember that is a universal sort of peaceful place for this human being thing that we are, and that we have to protect that or we'll lose it. And then if we lose it, it'll be a detriment, because I think it is a fairly universal thing that people find peace and tranquility when they are near water.
I'm Tate Chamberlain. This is the Hatch Podcast. Michelle C., Joel, David, thanks so much for being here. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And by the end of a conversation like this, something shifts. At the beginning, water can sound like a technical problem. Reservoir levels, snowpack, allocations, policy, numbers on charts, systems to manage. But the longer people talk about it, the more it starts to feel like something else, a relationship. Not just between people and water, but between people and place, between cultures and watersheds, between the past and whatever comes next. That's what you hear in this conversation with Michelle C. Benally, David Perkey, and Joel Barnes. Different ways of understanding the same element moving through the same world. Water shaping landscapes, water shaping law, water shaping the way communities think about responsibility. And the truth is, the water will keep moving whether those systems work or not. It will fall as snow somewhere, flow through a river somewhere else, evaporate, gather, and return again. The question isn't whether water keeps moving. The question is what kind of relationship we build with it while it does. Thanks for listening. Music from the Hatch Arcosanti series includes a piece titled Freedom by neoclassical pianist Black Bach, performed with the Summit Orchestra. Stay tuned for my full-length interview with Black Bach and Benjamin Von Wong on art and activism.
It seems now more than ever that we have found ourselves on the cusp of monumental worldwide change. Whether we consider the environment, politics, infrastructure, health, economics, or inequities across a broad swath of social constructs, the consensus is clear and urgent. All is not as it should be. The United Nations, a consortium of 193 member states from around the globe, agrees. In 2015, the UN unanimously adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. These goals call for urgent action and global partnership to secure peace and prosperity for people and the planet, now and into the future.
In alignment with the SDGs, Hatch, a curated network of artists, activists, and entrepreneurs working together to accelerate positive global change, has partnered with I Am Interchange to fuse adventure journalism with experiential design labs to develop innovative solutions to complex global challenges. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to the podcast. If you enjoy it, please subscribe or leave us a rating. This episode was produced by Yara Craner, Susan Karstensen, and me, Tate Chamberlain. A shout out to our media and production team, Jessica Byerly, Darko Sevilla, Jacob Desch, Sean Mackinson, Amin Yarsu, and Zane Giordano. A special thanks to Yara Craner, Jared Silverman, Kirk Euclid, Roshi Gavechi, Eitan Shapira, Pete Strom, Reem Haddad, Cole Jansen, Tom Silverman, Raymond Ansodagi, Mark Gerner, Adam Taylor, Erica Mackey, Elke Govertson, Anya Bulis, Bradley Honeyquill, and the rest of the Hatch team and crew from Arcosanti. Thank you for hosting me. To learn more about Hatch, visit hatchexperience.org. Building community could not happen without food. And with that, I'd like to thank Whistle Pig Korean, Red Tractor Pizza, and Zocalo Coffee House. Remember, share airtime and don't ruin dinner.